Good evening and welcome to the Chatham Select Board August 10th, 2021 meeting. This meeting is being recorded and will be available shortly hereafter for scheduled and on-demand viewing on any smartphone or tablet device. If anyone is recording the meeting, please notify me. Pursuant to Governor Baker's June 16, 2021 signing of an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, including the extension of his March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, that's General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, until April 1st, 2022. This meeting of the Chatham Select Board is being conducted both in person and via remote public participation. Every effort will be made to ensure the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen to this meeting while in progress may do so by calling the phone number 1-508-945-4410, conference ID 134208-476#, or join the meeting online via Microsoft Teams through the link in the posted agenda. While this is a live broadcast, the simulcast on Channel 18, despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide a real-time access. We will post a record of the meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. So thank you and welcome again. Let's start with a roll call. Select Board Member Corey Metters.
Present.
Select Board Member, yeah, right, Dean DeCastro.
Present.
And Select Board Member Jeff Dykens.
Present.
And the chair is present, Peter Kokolas. All right, just a reminder for everyone to please mute your microphones and close your cameras or shut off your cameras until you're being spoken to. Let's do just a quick overview of our agenda. We have minutes today. Then we have public announcements and agenda item requests, and that's just for agenda item requests. We then go into new business, which includes a coronavirus update and a drinking water update, and there'll be public input for both of those. Then we have public comments on our business agenda. Just prior to our business agenda, we have two public hearings, one on mooring appeal hearing and another on consider recommendation from the Traffic Safety Committee. Both of those will have public input. And then our business agenda items include donation acceptances and Cape Water protection. And then we'll end up with some appointments. So let's, can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Second.
Second, okay. Any discussion or changes or additions? Seeing none, we'll take a vote. Jeff?
I abstain. I was absent.
Dean?
Aye.
Corey?
Aye.
And the chair says aye. Any public announcements or agenda item requests? Any from the audience? Seeing none, any from anybody electronically or on the phone? Oh, the board. I see. Corey, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on some recent conversations I've had, I'd like to make the following request. I'd like to do an update on the Eldridge Garage project, just kind of a general overview of that one. But there is a specific item of that project I'd like to also include is the update on the time frame for the repairs and maintenance issues on the drainage concerns that we just funded at the last town meeting. So if that could be brought up for discussion and updates, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Any others? Dean?
Mr. Chair, I just really want to join in that request of Select Board Member Metters. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I saw that too. Anything, Jeff? No?
Yes.
Okay. Jeff? Go ahead.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, I requested it 2 or 3 times, but I just, in the interest of probably a really long lead time, just a review of paid parking. I asked in September and October and March as well. So I know it's complicated and there's a lot of work. We have some work to build on, and it's going to take a long lead time if we so desire. So I just think we want to get on it. Thanks.
Good, thank you. Dean?
I'd like to join in that one as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would too. We had that discussion. Okay. I saw a number of people come in. Anybody have an agenda item request? No?
Mr.
Okay.
Chair, you have one person on the Teams meeting, Paula Lofgren, who has her hand up.
Okay. Okay, Paula, go ahead.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Paula Lofgren, Horizon Drive. I have two items, an announcement and an agenda item request. The announcement is I would like to encourage residents to log into or watch the Airport Commission meeting tomorrow evening, Wednesday at 5 p.m. There are two agenda items there that are of particular interest. One is they will present the final version of their environmental assessment. And two, there'll be a report on Monday's joint meeting of the Airport Commission and the Planning Board with regards to the issues regarding the runway protection zone and the West Chatham Village development plans. The second item is an agenda request. I would like to request the board review and discuss the above-mentioned final environmental assessment being presented tomorrow night at the Airport Commission meeting. Citizens are eager to hear on the record how their elected officials view this important document, which has implications for the natural resources and quality of life of the Chatham residents. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paula. Anyone else? Okay. That's it for now. Let's see, we cover coronavirus updates. Dr. Bob on?
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Bob.
So, can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, so let me give you a quick update on where we are coronavirus in the big picture, and then I will speak to the Chatham specific situation as well. So let me share my screen here. And the first figure is our typical, well, not typical, but our graph showing monthly cases since the beginning of the pandemic. We right now are at 341 cumulative cases in Chatham since the beginning of the pandemic. Currently, we have 4 cases so far this month. We had, our low point was back in June of this year when we only had 2 cases. We saw an uptick in cases to 9 in July. And so far for the month of August, we are at 4 cases, which matches what we had all of last year in the month of July. The month of August. So we're only a third of the way through the month so far this year, but we have the same number of cases as we had all month last year. So I'm not suggesting that we're starting to see an upward trend again, but we're starting to see an upward trend again, unfortunately. And I think we all know that predominantly that's being driven by the Delta variant. On our call with DPH this afternoon, they indicated that currently between 80 and 85% of the cases in Massachusetts are the Delta variant. The reason for that range is it depends on which data set you're looking at, whether it's the Commonwealth specific data, the CDC data, or a third set of data, but they're all in that 80 to 85% range. So pretty consistent across the board that the Delta variant is now the predominant variant in Massachusetts, and that has shifted from what we saw earlier last spring, when the original or the Alpha variant was about 50% of the cases. That has now been usurped by the Delta variant. In terms of where we are specifically in Chatham, the graph before you now is our average daily incident rate. And we have currently plateaued for the last 2 weeks at about 7.4 for that per 100,000 people. So that is, that is some good news. We're not seeing an upward trend. Hopefully, either the plateau continues or we will see a decrease in the number of cases specific to Chatham. In terms of our percent positivity, which basically the graph basically mirrors the average daily incident rate. But right now, as of the 5th of August, the average, the percent positivity rate for Chatham is 1.9%, which is currently the lowest percent positivity for any town on the Cape, which is good news. Last week we were at 2.21, so we've dropped down a little bit. The statewide average right now is about 2.4%. So we are doing better than the statewide average and the best of any town on the Cape, which continues to be good news. I didn't update the vaccine percent graph for you this week because, as we saw at the last meeting, Chatham is doing very well on vaccinations. And so those percentages, they get to a point, they don't increase a whole lot when you start to get up, 90% or better. But so I didn't bother that graph tonight. I just want to show you the statewide new case AIDS distribution. This is data as of August 4th because it's only updated weekly for the previous 2 weeks, and it just highlights again that the 20 to 39-year-old age demographic are accounting for almost 50% of the cases in Massachusetts. And again, we are also seeing the younger demographics, so those below age 19, as I'm sure you've heard about in the news and whatnot, the rise in pediatric cases on a nationwide basis. We are also seeing the same thing here in Massachusetts. So if you notice, those under 19-year-olds now are accounting for a larger percentage of the new cases than say the three older demographics from 60 and 80 plus. So that's just an indication that, the older demographic is more highly vaccinated. And unfortunately, it's the younger demographics now that are being hit with a larger percentage of the COVID cases. The other thing I just wanted to touch on, two other things I wanted to touch on briefly tonight is the topic of breakthrough cases, because I know that is a topic of substantial interest, both in the community as well as across the state and nationally. And just to give you some quick numbers, right now the number of breakthrough cases in Massachusetts, and by breakthrough we mean somebody who has been fully vaccinated but has subsequently tested positive for COVID-19, it is averaging about 0.23%, and that's based on all the people in Massachusetts that are fully vaccinated, and that is an average over the 3 different vaccines that are currently approved. So the Moderna, the Pfizer, and the J&J. And between the 3 individual vaccines, it really doesn't vary much. So 0.33 on average across everybody vaccinated in Massachusetts and across all 3 vaccines. In terms of how many people that have been fully vaccinated end up in the hospital, it's about 4.4%. And for the number of people that have died, it's about 9% of people that have been fully vaccinated. Keep in mind the demographic there generally tends to be the older demographic. Even though they've been vaccinated, they are the ones that were predominantly a breakthrough infection, predominantly results in death. And generally that's because they have 1 or more underlying medical conditions. So just wanted to give you those quick numbers. And then in terms of some Chatham specific information, I'm sure everybody's aware that we did have a community center employee who tested positive. Actually, we had 2 community center employees tested positive over the weekend, leading us to close the summer recreation program, as well as close down the community center. I am happy to report that late this afternoon, we got the test results back. We held a test clinic yesterday for 25 members of the community center, as well as the recreation program staff. We got the results back today. 24 of those 25 were negative. We used the more specific PCR test. So that's why it took 24 hours to get the results back. But 24 out of those 25 were negative. The only one that was positive was the individual who initially tested positive. So that was not unexpected. There was a second person who did a home test over the weekend that indicated they were positive, but on the more definitive PCR test, they were negative. There's good news there, as well as all the members of the recreation program staff. So all the summer staff that work directly with the summer recreation program participants were negative. So that is good news. We issued a press release with that updated information about an hour ago. It is up on the town's website. It has also been posted on our Facebook page, as well as sent out to the press. And so based on that information, the community center is planning to reopen tomorrow at 1 p.m. As they normally would, from 1 to 9. We had canceled the last week of the recreation program for this week, but there will be a bridge program starting up next week. Starting up on the 23rd of some other recreation department programs. And so with that update, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Bob. Dean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Bob, for the report. And a few questions regarding some of the statistics that you gave us. With respect to the breakthrough cases in Massachusetts, which is an extremely low percentage, as you pointed out, 0.233%, you said that 9%, the 9% mortality figure, is that of the breakthrough cases, 9% of those?
Yes, 9% of the breakthrough cases, yes.
And 4.4% of the breakthrough cases were hospitalized?
Yes.
Okay. Did the DPH give any data on the total number of hospitalizations currently in the state for COVID and the total number of deaths for COVID, percentage-wise? I don't need to know the actual
No, they
numbers.
generally don't report percentages. They report the absolute numbers.
Do you have those?
I can get them very quickly. I just looked at them, but I did not write them down, if you will. So in the state's latest update as of 5 o'clock this afternoon, there have been 17,743 confirmed deaths, and there have been 369 probable deaths. So roughly 18,000 deaths, either definitive or probable to COVID in Massachusetts.
That's since the
And
beginning. That's since the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah, that's since the
What-
beginning of the
what I'm-
pandemic.
what I'm-
And there,
What I'm
There
trying
are-
to get at is, you know, we're hearing all this about the Delta variant. What I'm trying to get at is the Delta variant really causing a burden on the hospitals? Is it really causing symptoms? Is it really causing deaths in significant numbers? Because I can't get that information on television, I'll tell you that.
right
So-
now, there are 334 patients hospitalized in Massachusetts. That number has been creeping up over the last several, 6 weeks or so, as the Delta variant has taken a foothold. There hasn't been a substantial increase in deaths. And I think that's, the product of the fact that a lot of the people that are getting sick now are the younger demographic or people that are vaccinated. And so as a result, they don't get as sick and it doesn't as often lead to death. So, the vaccine is definitely doing what the vaccine should be doing. It's keeping the number of hospitalizations and the number of deaths down.
I fully agree with that. I think that the high rate of vaccination in this state has really been a significant accomplishment. And I think if you look, you drill down to Chatham, a month ago we had, 15,000 people here for the 4th of July parade. We have not seen a real spike in this town.
Right.
So
That's correct.
that leads me to ask my final question. Was there any suggestion, at least in the DPW call that you had, that the state is looking to impose a mask mandate or additional lockdowns, or are they simply going to rely on the guidance from CDC as the governor has thus far?
There's been no indication of any kind of lockdown or a statewide mask mandate so far. Obviously things could potentially change.
Sure.
But at this point, there's nothing to indicate they're heading in that direction.
And our own Board of Health, I know, monitors this pretty closely. Have they met? I know they met a couple of weeks ago, and I thought they took a very balanced approach. Has that changed at all?
No, the board met not this Monday, but last Monday. We discussed where we were in case counts. The board did not feel at this point that any action was warranted, but obviously they're continuing to monitor the data as we do, and we will advise, if the board decides to go in any other direction,
Okay.
honestly.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate your report. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Anyone else from the board? Any from the public? Yes, please. And if there's a button, and if it's not green, press it when you get up there on the microphone. Yeah.
Hi, Bob. It's unclear to me, is the VNA testing for the variant? In other words, do we know whether Chatham cases have Delta variant that are very recent? Is that part of the testing process to find out if it's Delta variant or whether it's just COVID?
Well, the Delta variant is COVID. It's just a different strain of COVID.
But are
yeah.
we discriminating and finding that out?
No, the VNA does not do that level of testing. That is either done by the state or CDC. It's the state sends a percentage of the positive test case. Sorry, the state sends a percentage of positive cases to the CDC and others to have them typed as to what variant they may or may not be. It is not every case, but it is a fairly significant portion. So the state is comfortable that they are doing enough variant testing to make their determinations of which variant is the predominant variant in Massachusetts, but it's not every case. And we don't get a report to know specifically if the Chatham cases are the Delta variant, but I think it's probably pretty safe to say that 9 times out of 10, if it's a positive case now, it will be the Delta variant.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the, okay, how about online, Jill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have EBG, who I believe is Ms. Gibbs.
Elaine?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow up on what Selectman Nicastro said, in terms of hospitalizations, you mentioned that there are 332 people hospitalized in Massachusetts. I recall back when this began that was how many Mass General had on a given day. So I think that number is still incredibly low. And I was trying to find out, the last I had heard that the Provincetown episode resulted in 932 positive tests, but that only resulted in 7 hospitalizations, 5 from Mass residents and 2 out of state, and no deaths. So I think what's happening to a large degree is the Delta variant may be more contagious, but it seems to be asymptomatic and not as dangerous because, I mean, to have 932 people infected and only 7 hospitalizations, I think is a good sign. That again, it may be transferred, but I think a lot of those people were asymptomatic and only found out they had it because of contact tracing. So I think that's important to report so that people don't get unnecessarily nervous about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Dr. Bob, anyone else? Okay, thank you. We'll move
All right,
on.
thank you.
We'll move on to Tom Temple and PFAS and water update. Hey, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everybody. Just a quick update. We did receive our latest results from August 3rd from the PFAS sampling that we took. We ran everything through the waste. So we took samples from Indian Hill, well 4, there was no detect, as well as Training Field, well 5. We were below, we were 6.58 and 6.24 NGLs. And with respect to the Water Vision, the next sampling that we're going to be doing will be August 17th for just well 5, where well 4 is under construction and modifications. We won't be able to take the sampling for 4 at that time. Just a quick update, the wells are currently running between 16 and 18 hours per day. We've reduced the flow rate from wells 2 and 8 to help prevent low well levels, as well as our storage tanks. We ended up hitting the low level 5 times this past week, which is, in the 80s. We were at 82, 83, and I believe 80, 81. And so that's always alarming, trying to get the water back up into the tank in a shorter period of time, especially with one well offline. So as I indicated, well 4, we're in rehab currently for Indian Hill, and they're currently doing the demolition and removal of the old equipment, flow meters, flow charts, et cetera. We're also updating the electrical wiring in that current well, as well as we're waiting for delivery of the day tanks, the bulk tanks, and chemical feed pumps, which should be in next week. We currently, for the month of July, we ended up with negative 14, or I should say 14% decrease for the month of July in comparison to July of 2020. Currently to August 7th, we have a 20.6% decrease till August 7th for the month of August compared to last August. So those numbers are all down considerably from the previous year, which is good. We did go ahead and have 2 contracts out of the 3 that we were looking to have endorsed. We've endorsed the training field well 5 study, as well as the well 10 and 11 design and engineering cost completion for the blending of wells 10 and 11. Those contracts have all been endorsed. We're waiting for the PFAS, the groundwater monitoring, modeling, and contamination source inventory. We're under review for the various firms for that. So just a quick look at the chart in the back of the package that you received. You'll notice the numbers that I had just mentioned on the sampling that we just took on August 3rd, and the averages thus far, all the way through that we've taken, are 17.5, which is underneath the 20% maximum allowed. So I think right now, we're still, well 5 is still offline, and it will remain offline until such time as both Mass DEP as well as the Select Board take the necessary action to approve the activation of well 5 and 8 blending. And that's really all I have to date, where we only had the 1 samples from the last time we spoke.
Thank you, Tom. Dean, and then Jeff. And Corey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tom, a couple of questions. So well 5 and 8, prior to the discovery of the higher level of PFAS, according to the state standard, were those 2 wells blended previously?
They were not.
Why would we think then of blending them together if we clear well 5?
Well, if we clear well 5, that's great. If we don't need to blend it, but if we don't, we would blend it to get the numbers into compliance with the requirements of the state, and that would solve the issues of the demand for the water that we need. Would be in the Safe Drinking Water Act, as well as meeting all the requirements for Mass DEP, as well as the industry standards.
But if the numbers continue to come down in well 5, so they've been in the 6 and 7 ranges recently, as recently as August 3rd, and you yourself said 17.5% average, then we wouldn't need to blend that 5 with 8, right? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think what'll happen, and I think I mentioned it a few reports ago, if we were to activate well 5, there may be restrictions that Mass DEP imposes where we have to do testing 24 hours prior to starting up that well 5. You know, there's all kinds of parameters that they wanted us to do, and blending was one of them. And keep in mind, because well 5 has been off, we haven't been pumping that well like we normally would every single day. So I think that the drawing out that we're getting for that well, I don't know that we're, you know, the numbers are low, but I think Mass DEP would want us to probably blend that to start out with, making sure that the numbers are staying low. And they would require not only quarterly sampling, but they would also require the town to also do the monthly sampling as well as the regular sampling that we do currently. So.
Okay. Second question, regarding the enforcement letters, do you know roughly how many have been sent out? This is on the water restrictions, the mandate.
I'm not positive on that number. I can certainly look in and send an email and give you that for the next meeting if you'd like. I could
Do you
tell
think
you.
do you think they've been voluminous or modest in amount?
I think it's been, you know, given the numbers that we're getting for pumpage, I think that it's gone way down compared to what we were at before the reverse 911 calls and all the publicity with the PFAS. So I think there has been a great decline, as you can see from the numbers from July and August thus far. I mean, 14% lower and 20% thus far for August, and we've had some pretty hot time in between that. So, you know, I think people, for the most part, are curbing it down quite a bit.
Okay, if you could get those numbers for the next update.
Sure.
In 2 weeks. The final question, the contract endorsements for 5 and 8 and 10 and 11, who are the contractors, or who is the contractor
The engineering contractor is Weston and Sampson.
for both of those?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would ask that when the Select Board has concluded its questions, that you permit public comment or questions.
Yes.
Thank you.
We will, thank you. Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom, thank you for your report. Very enlightening. I just wanted to highlight the 14% decrease July over July last year. This year represents 13,511,000 gallons of water. So I think, you know, you noted it in your summary, but I think a combination of the mandatory restrictions, we've had a little wetter July than we've experienced in the recent past, and then your public outreach, I think, the reverse phone calls, et cetera, I think is working. I think people are taking it seriously, and I think the public ought to know that we're gaining a little bit here. You said we pumped 17 to 18 hours a day. How many hours a day was it last year, Tom, about? Was it less than that, more than that?
We're pretty much on target with that last year as well. I think the year before, when we were, we were still completing well 6, 7, and 9, we were at some staggering numbers where we were 19 and 20 hours and sometimes 21 hours, and which is really taxing to the system. So, it's still a lot because of the alternating of the wells that we have and having different levels where they shut down, that we have to switch over to the other wells to keep everything in check. So, the water division is doing a great job monitoring and keeping track of where we are for the different wells and heights that we need on that, as well as managing the storage tanks to make sure that we're always in full as much as we can for fire suppression. So.
I was struck, I know it was the meeting I missed or the meeting before, but I was struck by the comment, I think Dr. Duncanson or you, or even Weston Sampson said that there's plenty of water in the ground, it's just getting it out and getting it usable. So to that end, I think, in this particular arena, too much is always enough. Seems as though, so I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, and I apologize in advance for not forewarning you, but we want to get 10 and 11 cooking. We want to get them online. If we were to approve the funds necessary to get 10 and 11 online, how long would that take, Tom? Best guesstimate to get them online.
Once the engineering design is done, the construction side, I mean, we had the wells 6, 7, and 9. I think we had that done in probably approximately a year for substantially complete, but the plans were pretty well on the way. Mm-hmm. So With 10 and 11, I think the design where 90% of that was already done, I think we could move that along relatively quick. And my goal is to push and get a contractor and stay on top like we did the last construction that we did for wells 6, 7, and 9.
And to follow up on my note about too much is always enough, are we thinking, playing it forward at all about other wells in town, other than 10 and 11 and
Yeah, I think, looking at it, I would probably recommend if we're having to look at the iron and manganese as well as the PFAS, it makes more sense to combine like a 4, a 5, and an 8 together. That way we're only paying for one facility to all these systems, the system to go through for each of those wells, similar to what we did for 6, 7, and 9. So you're only building one bigger building versus, 3 separate buildings, and the cost savings that we get from that, I think that would be my preference. I think it's something that staff has to talk about and come up with some numbers and see where we are and, give our best recommendation to the select board and moving forward with that.
super? And I say too much is always enough very glibly. I mean, we know that water is a very precious resource, and we have to be very circumspect with its use, so I say that glibly. But, the thought that we have enough water in this lens struck me. Well, if we do, then let's get enough out to service the town in the way it should be serviced. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Corey?
All right. Tom, thank you for the update. I just want to ask the following question for a little bit of clarity. Going back to wells 5 and 8, the mechanics of the blending, I totally understand. I follow it. I understand that. It's a philosophical element that I'm going to be struggling with a little bit. So, at some point, you're going to be coming before the select board to be endorsed to blend 5 and 8, and for whatever reason that was not supported, where would that leave us? That's the clarity I'm looking for right now.
Right now, we have to have both your approval as well as Mass DEP. So the restrictions that whatever they impose when we come time and show them all the historic data that we've been collecting for wells 5, 8, and 4, and all the wells that we're talking about, we have to get approval from them as well as from the select board. And, those numbers have to, clearly show where we are with the wells and the contaminants that are left in there, the PFAS and the levels. And they have to have a comfort level that we're going to meet the Drinking Water, Safe Drinking Water Act, as well as all the requirements that they set forth. So without it, we need, I think the immediate need is well 4. And our hope right now is we're very optimistic with the information I just mentioned about the demolition and the new construction and the stuff that we're doing right now for well 4. We're hoping that the materials that we're getting, we stay on track. Right now, it looks like we're still optimistic that we can meet a September deadline to get well 4 online, which is extremely, that'll take the place of 5 right now, which, we're missing that water, that amount of water. It's almost the same. It's like probably about 100,000 gallons per minute less, 100 gallons less per minute. So it's really swapping one for the other, and that'll buy us the time. But we really need to get 5 and 8 on board. But 10 and 11, if we can get that, that's 350 gallons per minute for each one of those wells, and also is a big boost to our distribution system and less taxing for all our pumps. So I don't know where we'd be. I don't know if I've answered your question, but I don't know with denying well 5 and 8 to be blended. They ultimately blend all in the system once you get them there into the tank, and then we're sampling every place where the water is collected in our storage tanks. They still have to be sampled when they leave the tank as well. So it's being sampled, all the way through the distribution system. So.
Okay, just one kind of follow-up question is, from a timetable perspective, where does Mass DEP stand and they're weighing in on the blending of 5 and 8? Because obviously they would have to bless it first.
Weston and Sampson, our consultant engineer, has been working closely with them. they've been guiding them on what needs to be done and making sure that, we get enough historic data of these samplings that we're giving them to meet their requirements. So I certainly, right now, they're suggesting that we blend 5 and 8 together. And, we have to show, like I said, the quarterly results for the blending of those, the levels at which we're blending them, the volumes of water that's going between 8 to 5. And we take the samplings like we show on the chart, on the blending sample side of things. So they're going to dictate to us what we can and can't do as the town of Chatham, wants to move forward. We may want to go with 5 because the numbers are great, but they may tell us differently, and we have to adhere to what they're telling us.
Okay, so maybe I'm not clear. I guess, when are we going to have a definitive position from Mass DEP on the blending of 5 and 8? I guess, because if I understand
Well,
the mechanics,
I think right now if you look at the chart, we've just entered under the threshold. We're at 17.5 NGLs, and before we were up well over that, like probably 28 or 29, which is above the 20 parts per trillion that they typically require. So, after all these samples that we've just taken, we're at 17.5, which is under that requirement. I think that they would want us to be, have more data before they'd make any determination for us.
okay, so we don't have a definitive timetable. Okay.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. Jeff, then Dean.
Yeah, no, I think you just answered my question. I was going to say, when do we declare, well 5 clean enough to bring on board? And it's got to be DEP's call. I think they have to weigh in. So we're going to continue to test it every 2 weeks or thereabouts. And what if right now we've had 1, 2, 3, 4 clean tests of well 5. Is it going to take 8 tests or 20 tests, or when would DEP say, hey, you've tested enough? Would they then also have us pump more of well 5 you kind of insinuated that because we haven't been using it, maybe the results are better. Yeah. So would they then, you think, ask us to pump more water out of well 5 and then test again?
That would be my guess.
Yeah,
I would think that they would require us to do more sampling after we've been pumping a
Okay.
longer period of time. They would require us to take samples, raw samples again, so
Yeah.
it's not going into the system, but pump it for a certain amount of hours a day, like we would be running it, take samples, and see if those numbers stay down low, below the threshold, and if it can go independently of 8. They may say that we're not going to allow that. We want you to blend. Again, I will have to get back to the select board and let you know what direction they're looking at and try to get some timetables from them as far as how many more samples would meet their requirements, and get back to you for the next meeting.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. I mean, I think they need to weigh in before we kind of get some clear direction as a board. We'll really want to hear from them. I think it's what you're hearing from us, or you're certainly hearing from me and the rest of the board. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Just the final general question, Tom. Given that we're not pumping as much and, well, we think we see more rain, at least that's what we see around us, are we still playing catch-up as far as, quote, a drought emergency, or are we even, or are we kind of increasing a little bit? Even though there's plenty of water, is it getting up high enough for us yet?
We're still technically in a drought. Down the Cape, we're still, in a drought condition. And the levels that, we have for the groundwater here is still well below the normal level. So we're still in drought conditions. The only thing we could do again is to, maybe do another reverse 911 call, limit irrigation system so it's only 2 days per week, instead of the current system, every other day like we're doing, and maybe, add language for mandatory water restrictions for 1 inch per week versus the current language of 1 inch per watering event. I think those are, other than that, I believe that people, driving around and looking, in the morning on the way to work, different directions that I go, I don't see as much abuse as that I used to see, where people have it watering and going into the road, and I don't see that happening as much as I did in comparison to last year, and the numbers show that. So, I still think we need to be very cautious, because when the wells get to 81 and 82 feet for the level of the well, of the standpipes that we have, it takes a while to fill those back up to get them to the 103 elevation that we have. And we're always keeping our eye on that for fire suppression and the town's needs. So, you know, it's a real juggling act for the water division, and they're doing a great job, you know, keeping up with it. And they've been doing this for the almost 6 years that I've been here, so.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Tom. Anyone in the audience like to ask a question or make a comment? Jill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have Elaine Gibbs.
Okay.
Thank
Okay,
you,
Elaine.
Mr. Chair. My first question is on well 5. My understanding from Bob Duncanson's report to the Board of Health, if I understand correctly, is that while the well 5 numbers are low, it could be because you're only taking a sample and it's not actually drawing from more of the lens. And that when that happens, the numbers could go up. So I guess my question is there any way for us to be able to pump that well for 12 or 18 hours without it getting into the system so that we can test it to see if the PFAS go up because it's drawing from a larger area within the lens?
The answer to your question is yes, and I think that would be the next step that Mass DEP is probably going to impose and have us do. That would be probably our recommendation as well, because we want to see those numbers. We wouldn't want to enter it back into the system until we're perfectly clear that it can handle the pumping of a 10, 12, 15-hour period if we were going to be using it. So, you know, we're on the same page. I think that's, you know, what we're probably going to recommend as well if Mass DEP doesn't.
What, is there any reason why we can't just go and do that instead of waiting for DEP?
It's as easy as making a phone call and asking them to, you know, can we start this process? What's your opinion? Or send it in writing so we get something back in writing via email. I'm sure we can do that, so it's not holding up the process. And we're doing it onto waste anyway, so it's not going into our system. So I don't see why they wouldn't allow us to do that. But again, it has to be their approval for us to do it. So.
Okay. Yeah, because I think that would be a good plan to speed it up. And if I could get back to wells 10 and 11, last time I had asked the question as to why no samples were being taken from 10 and 11, and the explanation from Bob was, which I did not know, was that there are actually no pumps, and that is what the $3.6 million is going to be, that's going to be requested is for, to get them up and running. Is there any way that we can test through a monitoring well to see if 10 and 11 have PFAS in it? Because if we spend the 3.6 million and test for iron and manganese, because if we wait and only, you know, appropriate at the special town meeting 3.6 million for 10, 11, and then find out that they have iron and manganese and PFAS, then we've lost a year. You know, my feeling is that we should try and get as much done between now and the September town meeting to decide that we are going to build an iron and manganese plant for 10 and 11 and an iron and manganese plant for 4, 5, and 8, because we know they've got PFAS and we may have to remove them, and we can't remove them without an INM. And, you know, it's going to be a big number, but I'm concerned that we're going to wait until September, allocate a small amount of money, and then find out 3 months from now that we have all these other things we have to do, and then we're going to have to wait till town meeting or have another special town meeting.
Yeah, I can tell you that when money was appropriated a couple of years ago to do the prolonged pumping for wells 10 and 11, we did at that point in time test for the iron and manganese, and we weren't hitting any levels. They were all below any standard levels. PFAS wasn't an issue back then because, remember, it was 70 parts per trillion. We weren't getting anything for that either. And now that the recommendations have changed and the requirements have changed, you know, it would be something we'd have to find out again if that's even an issue or not.
I'm confused because when I had asked last week, it says that there was no samples drawn because we couldn't draw samples because there were no pumps. But you're saying that they have been tested for iron and manganese in the past?
I believe when we did the prolonged pumping, I can verify that and I can include it in my report for the next meeting, whether or not they tested when they did the prolonged pumping. We had our consultant engineer, they were out there for, 24 hours or whatever it was, 24 or 36 hours, and it was a couple days worth of prolonged pumping to make sure we were drawing down for wells 10 and 11, to see if everything had moved on from the previous contamination that was there at one time, years ago, back in the 1990s, and all that had moved on. So, I believe we do, but I'll include that in my next agenda report for the select board, what the findings were, if there was any.
And if we could do that prolonged pumping for 10 and 11, if we have that capacity to do that now, to find out if there are.
I'll check on that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Anyone else? No? Okay. Next on our agenda is our public comments on our business agenda, and the business agenda includes donation acceptance and a Cape Cod water protection. And before that, we're having public hearings. So anyone in the audience? How about online? Anything? Or
So, Mr. Chair, I don't know if Elaine still has her hand up from the previous item or not.
Elaine, do you want to speak now, or is that just from the prior discussion?
It's from the prior, I
Okay.
apologize.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
That's it.
Okay, first public hearing has to do with a mooring appeal. There's nothing to read. And, no, there's nothing to read as far as a public hearing. I asked that, and they said no, but,
Mr. Chair, there is, and I know it was publicized, and we have our harbor master here in person to assist.
okay. Welcome, Stuart.
Good evening.
Yeah, okay, is the light on?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Good evening. So this evening, you're here to hear an appeal by a decision of Stage Harbor Marine to not renew or revoke a rental mooring that is under the control of Stage Harbor Marine. The process is really up to you. You can hear from the marina first, or the person making the appeal, Mr. Marsh, or however you want to hear that.
Okay, I guess I should ask Mr. Marsh if he's available, if he'd like to speak. Yeah, please. And then we'll talk.
Okay, good evening, Select Board. Thanks for your time. I think one of the reasons you don't have anything to read is because I have no idea why I'm here. And that's not a funny comment at all. I really have no clue what this is all about or why I am here. I grew up in Chatham. My family moved here in 1970. I have two brothers that live here, Bill Marsh, Jim Marsh, and my mom still spends her summers here. I live in Idaho now, but I spend several months a year in Chatham. I've had a mooring with Stage Harbor Marine for 8 years. This is my 8th year there. I have a 40-foot sailboat that lives on that mooring and has been every year for the past 8 years. I've had no problems with anyone in the harbor. I've had no problems with Stage Harbor Marine. I've had no issues that I know of whatsoever during those 8 years. And I'll also add here that that boat was owned by my brother Bill Marsh prior to me buying it, and it was also on a Stage Harbor Marine mooring from about the mid-1990s to early 2000s. My brother Bill bought a Sabre 42-foot power boat probably around the first of the year. This is not a boat that is at all associated with mine. The boat went to Florida for the winter, and I brought that boat back for him in late June, early July. He was supposed to have a mooring at Saquatucket Harbor. That didn't materialize for whatever reason. I don't know why. I was on an 8 or 9 day trip coming up the coast, about 1,500 miles. So, a lot going on for a relatively short period of time. We pulled into Chatham Harbor about 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, July 5th. There was no mooring at Saquatucket. So I just went over and put the boat on my mooring because my sailboat, unfortunately, is not in the water yet. It is now, but it wasn't at the time. So I put Bill's boat on the mooring that I have a contract for with Stage Harbor Marine. And when I got to the mooring, none of the bridles or pennants were on the mooring. It was just a mooring ball. So we just threw a dock line through there just to hold us temporarily. And there was an individual by the name of Mel, I don't know his last name, he's been a longtime employee at Stage Harbor Marine for as long as I know, who happened to see this. And Mel came by on a Stage Harbor Marine workboat, asked us what was going on, saw our dock line going through the mooring. He said, that's not going to work. I'll be right back. Went into the shop, picked up a regular bridle and pennant, came back out, hooked up a big shackle to it, ran a zip tie through it, handed me the two ends of the two eyes of the bridle. I put them on the boat. I said to Mel, I said, hey, Bill's going to keep this boat here for a couple of days. He's got a slip at Saquatucket, 2-3 days, something like that. And he said, okay. And as far as I was concerned, if Mel is an employee of Stage Harbor Marine and I see him doing dock and mooring operations on a daily basis, and he travels into the shop and comes back with a bridle and hooks it all up, assembles it, and hands me the bridle to put on the boat, I'm assuming everything's fine. I'm assuming he's got no problem, Stage Harbor Marine has no problem with this boat being there for a relatively short period of time. So I also add, so that was on a Monday. I was running back and forth probably 2-3 times a day, just kind of unloading things from this long trip with Bill's tender between the boat and Stage Harbor Marine. I saw Andy 2-3 times. I saw Drew Micah 2 or 3 times. I saw Mel 2 or 3 times during that week. Nobody said anything to me whatsoever about having any grievance or complaint about Bill's boat being on a mooring that I had contracted for. We exchanged hellos. Drew told me, and by the way, that Thursday there was a hurricane warning. I don't know if you remember it or not, but in early July was a hurricane warning for a hurricane watch on Friday. Drew came up to me and said, John, when do you think you're going to put your boat in? I said, well, hopefully next week. And he said, well, I'm just letting you know that we went out to Bill's new Sabre, the boat that I had brought in. We put a safety line on there for you. I said, hey, thanks, Drew. That's awesome. And hopefully this storm's not going to materialize, which it really didn't. But anyway, because of that storm, Bill was kind of held up with trying to get the slip at Saquatucket Harbor, and we did eventually move the boat on that Saturday morning. But no one that whole week that I was running back and forth, the owner, which being Andy Micah, Drew, his son, Mel, any employee at Stage Harbor Marine said absolutely nothing to me whatsoever about having issues with me or issues of Bill on my mooring. On Saturday morning, so been 4 or 5 nights now, I came into the marina to pick up an employee of Bill's who was going to go out to the boat and help me and then help Bill because Bill was going to be moving the boat off of the mooring that I had contracted for. When I got to the dock to pick up this fellow who was Dan Chamberlain, and he's got a letter to me that I'd be happy to give to you, Andy Micah came running down to the dock, very upset, very angry, yelling at me, and he had a piece of paper in his hand, and I pulled up to the dock, and he tried to give me this piece of paper, and he was like, here's your check. This is your mooring fee. You no longer have a mooring for me. I want your brother's boat off of that mooring now. That's all he said. And I'm like, well, number one, I've got a contract with you, so I'm not taking that check. Number two, in 2 different places in your documents, that says that fee is non-refundable, so you can't refund it to me. Number 3, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what I did. This is not my boat. It's Bill's boat. If you've got an issue with Bill, take it up with Bill. He was yelling at me, he was screaming. This lasted 2 or 3 minutes, not long. I asked him to please tell me what was wrong, why he had an issue with me, and he would not answer me. He stormed off. Dan and I went out to the Bill's boat. I got on my cell phone. I called Stage Harbor Marine. Mel answered the phone. I said, can you please let me talk to Andy? And Mel said, I'm not going to let you talk to Andy. He doesn't want to talk to you. I said, okay, well, can you please relay a message to him? And he said, nope, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to relay a message to him. I don't want to have anything to do with this. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So at that point, I said, Mel, that boat will be off of that mooring within the hour. And it was. So we got the boat off by noon, and it's not been back on my mooring since. So that's kind of what happened. I really, like I said, I have no idea what I did wrong. I have no idea why Andy's upset at me and not my brother Bill. Now, as a couple other little side issues, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but I'm happy to give you some documentation. But in maybe the early 2000s, there was a number of complaints from a number of permit holders like myself, customers, about being taken advantage of with their loss of their mooring or not renewing their mooring at a couple of different boatyards in Harwich and Chatham specifically Riders Cove and Stage Harbor Marine. And as a result of that, I think the town asked the Inspector General to get involved. The Inspector General did a report. It's published. It's a town document. Like I said, I'm happy to give it to you. And essentially, the bottom line, for as far as I'm concerned, about that report is that these entities that operate and collect fees for these moorings do not own the ground or the bed that the moorings are anchored to. They do not own the water that is surrounded the moorings. They are temporary moorings. I think Mr. Smith will probably verify that. These moorings are permitted to these entities once a year. They own the tackle. They own the mooring and the tackle and the anchor, but they don't own what it sits on. And because of that, it's public property, and that's why the state gets involved. We're all shareholders in this, public domain, you know. And as a result of the Inspector General's report, the town of Chatham adapted some bylaws and a fair and equitable mooring assignment policy. I've got those documents here that essentially governs these private boatyards and their moorings. And from my interpretation of what I read, it seems pretty clear in these documents that a private boatyard cannot revoke or not renew a mooring permit because they think they can do whatever they want, because they think it belongs to them. They don't have carte blanche with respect to these moorings. They have to subscribe to the rules and the regulations in those two documents from the town. You know, the legislature recognized that municipal waters are to be held in trust for the benefit of all people, and moreover, it was understood for this to happen, the power to control these moorings in public waters must be given to persons that would be held accountable to the people. If you read some of those guidelines, you know, Article 265-14- period 1C, mooring permits, it says, no recreational boating facility shall fail to renew or revoke a mooring rental assignment without having complied with the applicable provisions of the policy. Copies of the notice shall be sent to the harbor master with the notice to the lessee. I never received written notice from Stage Harbor Marine or Andy Micah, and I don't believe Mr. Stuart Smith has ever received, I'll ask him when he gets up here, any type of written notice that was filed with the harbor master's office. And prior to now, I have no idea why Andy Micah was upset at me that my brother's boat was on a mooring. If you read further into this fair and equitable mooring policy, if you read the last paragraph on page 1, it says to me that a mooring permit may be revoked or not renewed, but only for cause. Reasons given are included but not limited to failure to pay an outstanding invoice, failure to abide by federal and state laws, unsafe or disruptive behavior. It cannot be arbitrarily revoked or not renewed by a boatyard. There has to be a reason. And further, a decision to not renew a mooring rental assignment shall be provided to the patron, meaning myself, member or customer in writing and setting forth the reason for the decision. I never received a notice. I never received a reason. And I don't believe that Stage Harbor Marine or Andy Micah has filed anything like that with the Harbor Master's office. Lastly, on that note, the fair and equitable, the bylaws article states, each recreational boating facility shall subscribe to and be bound by the Chatham Fair and Equitable Mooring Assignment Policy. In my opinion, that hasn't been done because of improper notice. One last note on, if you read Article 265-14- or period 1C, it says that any person aggrieved by such renewal or revocation should be entitled to pursue the appeal process outlined in this below without fear of reprisal or retribution. I was at the marina 2 or 3 times last week. I came down, I used their launch, I said hello to Andy. Andy didn't say anything to me except for exchanging a hello. On Sunday night, I came into the harbor with another brother's boat tied up to the dock. Mel happened to be there and shouted to me from up above. He said, Mr. Marsh, I've been instructed to tell you that you are not allowed on this property. And I said, oh, really? Because my contract with Stage Harbor Marine says that for $3,000 for a mooring for the year, I'm entitled to launch service and I'm entitled to use of the Stage Harbor Marine dinghy. And I told that to Mel, and Mel said, I don't care. This is private property. We want you off our private property. So in my opinion, that is reprisal and retribution. I was denied my rights that I had a contract for until this hearing is heard by the board. Let's see here. There is a clause in the Stage Harbor rules and regulations, which I have not seen for years, but I think somehow I wound up with a copy of it during the last month or so. That does say, where is it here? It does say the marina reserves the right in its sole discretion for any reason whatsoever to cancel this agreement upon 10 days' notice to the customer. And it does go further, as I say, the marina reserves the right to terminate this agreement for all accounts past due. First of all, I never got 10-day notice. It was immediate. Andy told me to get the boat off the mooring immediately. And second of all, if you read the town's bylaws and you read the fair and equitable policy, I believe that that is in direct conflict with those town policies. I believe you cannot arbitrarily or capriciously remove a person from their mooring. So I guess in closing, I've had my mooring for 8 years now. I don't think I've ever had a problem with Stage Harbor Marine. I talked to a couple people who have boats out there. I have letters from them, and these are folks who've been born and brought up in Chatham, lived here for 50, 60 years. I said, have you ever seen anything that I've done kind of wrong? And I have, like I said, I have letters I'm happy to pass to you. I think I've got a pretty darn good reputation out there. I've had this mooring for 8 years. I really have had no problems during this time. Moorings are almost impossible, as you know, to get in Chatham, especially in the Inner Harbor in Stage Harbor. Wait lists are maybe 20 years long. Where am I going to be able to enjoy the rest of my summer? Where am I going to be able to enjoy the next 2 or 3 or 4 summer seasons with my boat on a mooring out there that I should be entitled to hold until I abuse it or I do something wrong and I lose it or I give it up? I have no other place to go. I don't know where my boat could possibly go. It's almost like a life punishment for me. Like I said, I've had it for 8 years with no issues. And it's being tried to be taken away for something I didn't do that was not my boat. And like I said, they did not give me any notice and they didn't give me any opportunity to correct. So, it's kind of a steep sanction. And, you would think you'd really have to kind of screw up to get this. And I don't think I did. So I guess in closing, that's kind of my story. I don't really even think we should be having this hearing. Andy Micah and Stage Harbor Marine didn't follow the rules and regulations and procedures of either the bylaws or the fair and equitable policies, both of which require him to give me proper notice that he is revoking my mooring permit and give me a reason for that decision, and to file that with the office of the harbor master. None of these requirements were done by Stage Harbor Marine. So thank you for your time, and cheers.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Any questions from the board? No? Is anyone here from Stage Harbor Marine? We'll take one of you anyway. Which one first? Okay. Thank you. Just when you get to the podium, just give your name and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Andy Micah,
Welcome.
President of Stage Harbor Marine. I have to say that I did fail to give him proper notice, and the harbor master. I think in my anger over the situation, I reacted too quickly, and I should have done that. This was a culmination of a lot of things, and that I didn't notify him or tell him about. I have a real problem with confrontation and dealing with stuff, so telling people is very hard for me. But I guess I will, in the future, do that. So I will
Anyone have a
Again,
question or comment?
give in to,
Yeah. Jeff, excuse me, Corey and then Dean.
Okay, so just, nope.
Just Corey.
All right, thank you, Mr. All right, so just how to delicately kind of ask these questions. So I guess we're faced, from what I've heard so far this evening, a couple of different paths. Either there's some kind of remedy between you and Mr. Marsh, and you move forward this summer, or you would do proper protocol procedure, notices and everything.
that's what I will do.
So that, I guess I'm just kind of looking for clarity,
Yes.
what path you're looking to take right now.
I do not want him on my our moorings, but I obviously will let him sit there this year, but I'm going to go through the process. I don't want him as a customer.
All right, thank you.
You know, again, it's a lot of things. It states in the bylaws about lack of payment. Every year, we have to hassle him to get him to pay according to our schedule. We put it out in installments to make it a little easier to take. And we have to go after him to pay. You know, he did things around the boatyard. He'd come in and just use water and tie up to the dock for long periods of time without permission, never asked us, just did it. And by the time I got there, it was already there and done. And again, I don't like confrontation, and I didn't do anything about it. But these things all built up, and when he came in and just put his brother's boat on there without informing us, asking us anything, that was the final straw.
Okay, anyone else? Any other comments? Dean and then Jeff. And I'll just make a comment. There's always two sides to a story. If I understand what you said, you're going to allow him to stay on, which means we really don't, I'll let you speak, I'm sorry, if that's what I understand. And then you go through the process of whatever it is you're going to do and how you feel about it, and go through the process of making sure the notice and everything else is taken care of. Okay, Dean?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You kind of covered what I was going to ask, but just, Andy, so the current status is that Mr. Marsh will continue to enjoy the mooring for this season, is that what you're saying? And then,
Yeah.
your intention is to follow the policy and the bylaw and issue a notice that
Yep.
recites the reasons that you would like to
Exactly.
make a change. Okay, thank you.
Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Andy, that course of action fits the facts as we've heard, so I think that's prudent. That's a prudent course. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Thank you. There's no vote or anything required on this. We just. Go ahead. Please get up to the podium. Yeah. Otherwise, we can't record you.
Apologize for that. I guess I will have an opportunity in the future to, for rebuttal about what Mr. Micah had said about payments. I've always paid on time. Ask anybody in town. I always pay my bills on time. I don't know what he's talking about. As far as dock ties up, I do. I bring my boat in from time to time. There's an individual who owns a fishing boat there. He's tied up at T-Dock, and his name's Bob. And I come in and I talk to him, and I say, hey, he goes out the whole day. And I say, can I come in and take on water and wash my boat or whatever? And I do always ask for permission from Stage Harbor, and I do always tell him that Bob has given me permission. But anyway, Mr. Stuart Smith is here, and I would like to, there's a couple questions that I'd like to ask him before the board, and I'd like to have that opportunity.
Since it's a mute
Is it a mute
case-
point?
Yeah, it's a mute point. You could ask him personally. I mean,
Yeah, no,
Stu, he'll answer. Let me. Go ahead, Stu, if you have a comment. But I prefer not to go on to anything more on this. It's already taken care of in a way.
it is.
So you're satisfied for the year.
I am.
You're going to get a letter. That's a whole nother story. We'll take
Okay.
care of that later.
Okay.
Okay? Thank you. Yeah, Dean?
Mr. Chairman, do we have to take any vote? I mean, we had an appeal filed.
I don't know. It's in effect, it's been withdrawn. Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't believe there is an appeal. He's going to be in good standing for this year with his mooring, and there will be an opportunity for a formal appeal after the process is abided by. You can appeal it then, but when the requisite filings have been made, the requisite notifications have been made to the harbor master and to Mr. Marsh, I think then he would then be.
So,
Well, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Certainly the facts, as we've heard them from both individuals, moot the dispute at the present time. I just really would like to ask the harbor master, do you think, Stuart, that we need to take any kind of vote this evening, or just
I
leave
guess
things?
not. A little unusual
Yeah.
in that there's an appeal and you have certain timeframes that you're supposed to adhere to, but there is no appeal now because the dispute is over with for the time being. So we may be seeing this again in the future, presumably, but for tonight, I guess we're all good.
So effectively, the appeal has been mooted.
It's mooted and the boat will stay on the mooring. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I agree.
thank you, Dean.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Stuart. Okay, next public hearing has to do with, George Ryder Road. And the clerk, please make the announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Chatham Select Board will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, August 10th at 5:30 PM in the Town Office Annex, Large Meeting Room, 261 George Ryder Road, to consider the placement of new traffic signs, quote, "No parking, no tow zone," unquote, signs, west side of the first leg of Hammond Lane and the north side of the second leg of Hammond Lane to the intersection of Hammond Hill Road. The signs are of standard size and style and recommended to the board by the Traffic Safety Committee. All interested parties are encouraged to attend, signed members of the Board of Select Board.
Thank you. Okay, Lieutenant Goddard, is Lieutenant Goddard on, or, yes, he is, okay.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, welcome, Lieutenant Goddard.
Good evening. Thank you for hearing this. The Traffic Safety Committee met with a resident from Hammond Hill that was requesting these no parking signs be placed in this area, specifically because of the narrow width of this road. If vehicles are parked there, it almost completely obstructs the road for anything other than a very small vehicle, particularly any type of emergency vehicle. Taking a look at the roadway, Those two areas that are highlighted on the paperwork that you received from us indicate where the signs, we'd like the signs placed, and that would restrict any parking in that area. From the police department perspective, we really haven't had a lot of violations in that area, but on the other hand, if there is a vehicle parked there, it would be a serious encumbrance of any kind of emergency vehicle trying to get down there to the 11 or so houses that are behind that area.
Thank you. Any questions from Corey?
The only question I have is do you feel that this will remedy the situation or just displace it? I mean, we all have issues with the parking that's generated over the last decade. I mean, growing up here, certain areas of town have become more and more popular spots to park a car. And if we put no parking signs, those cars that were parked at that spot just move on to a little bit further down the street. So do you think this will actually remedy it completely, or do you see a problem being shifted, somewhere else? That's my only concern.
In this particular location, it's not a high incidence of vehicles being parked there. We don't do a lot of enforcement in this area. We're not finding vehicles parked there on a consistent and regular basis. So I don't think there's really going to be any issue of displacement of vehicles from this particular area. Parking is allowed right next door on the Water Street end of it. But at the no parking in the tow zone is a mechanism for us to be able to actually clear that roadway if somebody does park there. And it has happened occasionally, but it's such a narrow road in that beginning section especially, that if a vehicle does park there, it could end up effectively blocking that road for hours. And without this signage and mechanism, we wouldn't be able to clear that out.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Anyone else? Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Lieutenant. I move to approve the recommendation to install no parking signs on Hammond Lane. And I also move to approve the recommendation that the area be posted as a tow-away zone due to the narrow roadway conditions. And I think it's a fire hazard that those roads are extremely narrow, and I agree with the Traffic Study Committee and the Lieutenant.
Okay, second.
Mr. Chairman, I'll second that. I just wondered if there's any member of the public, because it is a public hearing, that has any comment on that.
Okay. There's no one in the room. Anybody online or on the phone?
I don't see any hands raised or anyone on the phone.
Okay, thank you, Jill. Let's take a vote. Corey?
Aye.
Dean?
Aye.
Jeff?
Aye.
And the chair says aye. Thank you. Next up on our agenda is business agenda, donation acceptance of oysters from Chatham Shellfish. Let's see, Renee. I know I saw Renee on there. There you are. Welcome.
Yes. Good evening, and thank you, Mr. Chair. And good evening to the Select Board. I'm here to see if the board will accept a generous donation from the Chatham Shellfish Company of 1,000 seed oysters and approximately 4,000 adult oysters that we would accept into our propagation program and distribute to the public at the beginning of oyster season on October 1st.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Renee, this is good news, I guess. Now, you're gonna plant them when? And of course, where, Renee? Just kidding.
It's always a secret.
Oh, yeah. Well, don't forget Pleasant Bay, Renee. Don't forget Pleasant Bay. Anyway.
Well, that's a tough one.
Yeah, okay. So I recommend that we accept the donation.
I'll second that motion.
A second. Any discussion? Okay, let's start with Corey.
Aye.
Dean?
Aye.
Jeff?
Resounding aye.
Chair says aye. Thank you very much, Renee. And thank
Thank you
Chatham
very much.
Shellfish.
Yeah. Thanks to the Chatham Shellfish Company.
Okay, next is the Cape Cod Water Protection Collaborative Funding. There's no action on this, but it's Alex? You're welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, in your packet, we provided an update on the Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund. And just a little background for the public. This was created with the expansion of the rooms tax to the short-term rentals. And currently, there's a 2.75% excise tax collected on the short-term and traditional rentals. And that goes into the Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund. of which all 15 towns on Cape Cod are members. So far, the fund has collected, do I have that? I didn't bring that with me. But the fund has collected money that will be given back to the towns for the purpose of wastewater. And Chatham is due to get over
10 million bucks.
yeah, quite a bit of money over the next few years for our upcoming subsidies for the Clean Water Trust issuances 18-14, a subsidy amount of over $2 million. For the Clean Water Trust 1947, a subsidy amount of $331,000. And for the upcoming projects that were just approved, the Queen Anne Pump Station upgrade, $616,000, and the stormwater improvements, a subsidy amount of 1.5 plus some money. And I see Bob Duncanson has his hand up to clarify some amounts, I'm sure. Bob?
Okay, Bob?
Your amounts were correct. I was just going to say that the fund has collected a total of 23.9 million since its inception back in 2009. And just interestingly enough, in the last quarterly report, which covered the period from March of 2021 to May of 2021, Chatham had the highest amount that was received by the fund or through the fund in terms of, the short-term rental tax that was collected in Chatham. So I think that's interesting information that we were the highest of all the towns on the Cape, little old Chatham.
Yeah, it's over $10 million, close to almost 11. But anyway, Jeff had his hand up, and then Dean.
No, I'm pleased that this was on the agenda. I just wanted to emphasize the huge success here, the amount of money coming back to Chatham that supports the incredible investment we've already made in infrastructure here in town. So I just want folks to know that there's money coming back, and it's coming back in the form of, I read $8 million bucks.
Willis.
That's on the pre-existing debt. Yeah. And then another, I just added it up, 4.4, and I may be wrong, but millions of dollars are coming back to the town of Chatham, recognizing or assisting us with defraying the costs of our already made investments in wastewater infrastructure. So it's huge. So I think we need to get beat our chests about it, and it's really good. It's phenomenal. And we have our challenges with respect to dollars that are going to be asked for from the town going forward. So this is very good news, and I think we ought to get it out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Dean?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bob and Alex, I was going to mention the 8.6 that Jeff just mentioned. This is reimbursing us basically for pre-existing debt. It will be paid to us over the course of 10 years, Alex, this 8.6 million? Okay.
That's correct, and we haven't received information on how that's going to be paid, but it is over the next 10 years, unless, Bob, you are a representative, Chatham's representative to the fund, so I don't know if you have more information on that.
No, it will be over 10 years in equal installments.
Bob, how often does the board meet that you serve on as our representative?
Well, we were meeting quarterly, and then COVID hit, and that kind of threw the schedule out. But yeah, pretty much quarterly, averaging it out. We had our first meeting in 2019, so yeah.
Was there any discussion or controversy with respect to these amounts that were awarded to Chatham or to other towns?
No, there was no amount, no controversy over the amounts. The board had prepared a set of criteria that we were going to use for all these. That was the subject of, several meetings worth of discussion before everybody agreed, specifically on the amount of the subsidy, which is 25%. But once that was done, then it was just, I hate to say it was pretty much automatic in terms of the amounts. After that, the critical criteria being you have to be listed on the state's SRF.
Okay.
And that just indicates that, there's already been quite a bit of review of the projects, which the fund decided we didn't want to get into, as long as it was approved by SRF through DEP and others, that the projects received all their appropriate reviews.
Thank you very much. This is, as others have said, this is a really good news for for the town, and appreciate your efforts on that board, Bob. Thank you. Thank you, Alex.
Okay. I'm going to make a comment. I don't go back many years in the town, and I think I've said this before. I first became interested in what was going on in the town when I started hearing about the water treatment facility. So I decided to go to one of the one of the select board meetings in the basement of the existing town hall. And I walked down the stairs, and it was mobbed, just unbelievably mobbed. And I did find it one area I could sit in. The arguments that were going on at that town about whether or not we should do this in the town, of course, I came from somewhere else. So every place I was previously, sewers were being considered and being put in. And the arguments against taking care of our nitrogen and phosphorus, and I still remember Dr. Duncanson said there are things out there that we don't know about, that if we have a facility, that we'll be able to take care of that. You know, here we are 10, no, it's longer than that, because all this argument was going on a couple of years. Nobody said anything about nitrogen or phosphorus or anything else that was going on. They were more concerned about density and building and having a problem with that. Understandably so, and there were ways that they did take care of that. But here we are now, and because of I'll call it the forward thinking of this town and Dr. Duncanson and everyone who was involved at the time, we have a facility that not only is way ahead of almost every other town, and the money that they're looking at spending compared to what we have and the funding that was required, I think he ought to pat himself on the back once in a while. He doesn't do that. You know, a little gorilla arms once in a while would be helpful. But I understand. But I think it's understanding what the needs are of a town, and I'm going to, my soapbox, right, and what's forward thinking and what were the requirements of a town, and you have to make a decision on where you think it's going to go, and it costs money at the time, but a lot of times it saves you a lot of money. That's just I get off my soapbox and say thank you very much to Dr. Duncanson and the time for where we are right now, because I think it's an amazing feat when you look at the rest of the town. Jeff.
Peter, well said, and I would just emphasize that the timing was impeccable in 2008, 2009 to access those zero-cost and very low-cost funds. The timing was impeccable. We had shovel-ready projects ready to receive the state funding that was supported by the Fed, so the timing was impeccable. And
Anyway,
Chatham was ahead of it, you're right.
So it's nice getting that. We have nothing else. And next on our agenda are appointments, and the first one has to do with registrar appointments. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chair,
Dean? Thank you.
I move that we appoint Ethel A. Shafter as a registrar, to the Board of Registrars until June 30th, 2024, as recommended by the town clerk.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Second, all right. Discussion? Okay, Jeff?
Aye?
Dean?
Aye.
Corey?
Aye.
And the chair says aye. And the next one is appointment of election officials. I guess we have to read them all. Yeah, yes, okay. I have a motion to, Gene?
I'll do that. I wasn't going to read them all, but I will read them all. But I did have a question. I don't know if Jill can answer. I don't know if Julie's on the phone. Because this is reminiscent of last year. The town clerk indicates that she reached out to both the Republican and the Democratic town committees and received a response from the Republicans, but not from the Democrats. So there are some Democratic names listed here. I just wonder where those come from if we didn't get them directly, or are they just people who have done this before and are being re-upped, as it were, presumably with their permission?
Mr. Chair, I think they'll be reappointed, having served previously.
Okay.
And if not, I can certainly get back to you. I don't see the town clerk still on the call.
So, thank you. Mr. Chair, I move that we appoint the following election officials as recommended by the town clerk, and I'll read them. Republicans, And this is all for, these are all for a term ending September 30th, 2022. Republicans, Marie Acton, William Cook, Cheryl Lewis, Diane Bronston, Rosette Gerstle, Virginia Nickerson, Marion Carlson, Elaine Gibbs, Martha Stone, Stephen Carlson, Paula Hansen. Democrats, Joan Caputo, Jacqueline Crimmins, Rebecca Hobeck, Mary McDermott, Lillian McNulty, Robin Young. Unenrolled, Joan Bagnell, Carol Barry, Janet Edson, Charlene Greenhall,
Greenhouse.
Jeannie Griffin Hatch, Betty Hayner, Martha Harrison, Christine Story Hart, Sandra Kosky, Mary Langiel, Alexandra Porter, David Porter, Louise Redfield, Jennifer Smith, Carol Totkus, and Britt Whitchurch.
Thank you.
Second.
Second, any discussion? Okay, I have a vote. Corey?
Aye.
Dean?
Aye.
Jeff?
Aye.
Chair says aye. And that's it for tonight, unless any other comments? Not that. I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second. Okay, Corey?
Aye.
Dean?
Aye.
Jeff?
Aye.
And the chair says aye, and good evening, Chatham. Have a nice week.